Hello and welcome to this class of Principles of Microeconomics. I am your teacher Muhammad Nadeem Sarwar. Today we shall continue our discussion on consumer choice. This is our second lecture on this topic, and in this lecture we shall talk about ordinal approach. We shall see how indifference curve is used to represent consumer equilibrium. So, let's start with the lecture. Students, in the previous lecture, we discussed that consumers consume different commodities to derive satisfaction from them, and this satisfaction is termed as utility. There are two broader approaches that discuss consumer choice in economics. First is Ordinal Approach, which we discussed in last lecture in detail. We saw that in Ordinal Approach, it is assumed that utility is cardinally measurable. That is, a consumer can measure the utility that he gets by consuming a commodity like one can measure the physical quantities. We also talked about the behavior of total utility, marginal utility, and discussed how a consumer maximizes his satisfaction. However, critics pose questions on the cardinal measurement of utility. Also, there is a criticism that according to Ordinal Approach, it is not very much easy or straightforward to break income effect into price effect into income effect and substitution effect. Today we shall discuss the second main approach, which is called as Ordinal approach. Assumes that utility is not cardinally measurable, but it is rankable. That is, when a consumer consumes different commodities, he or she can rank those commodities based on the utility provided by these commodities. But how much utility is provided by each commodity is not measurable. This ranking is similar to the ranking of sports teams. As we see that different football clubs, different cricket teams, different tennis players are ranked as number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. The number 1 is one which is the best, number 2 is the second best, number 3 is the third best, and so on. However, we understand that the difference between first and second is not same to the difference between second and third, or to the difference between 7th and 8th, and so on. Therefore, these numbers 1, 2, 3 just represent the position of the commodities according to the satisfaction they provide to a consumer. This is what we meant by ranking of the utility. The second assumption is that this approach says that consumer consumes a bundle or a basket of goods and services, and utility depends on the quantities of the commodities in the bundle or basket. That is, consumer compares a bundle having different quantities of commodities with another bundle having different quantities of the commodities, and he derives the utility from the bundle as a whole. For simplicity, we assume that the bundle consists of two commodities, X and Y. So the utility depends on the bundle of X and Y as a whole. The important signs or symbols we use are: the first represents indifferent to, that is, when the two bundles provide us with same level of satisfaction. Second refers to preferred to, that means when one bundle gives us higher satisfaction than the second bundle. Third represents at least as good as, that means when first bundle either gives us higher satisfaction or it provides equal satisfaction to the second bundle. Similarly, the last two signs can be understood. Let's move on to the assumptions of rational choice. Here we are discussing a few more important assumptions. First one is rationality. That means the consumer is rational. By the rationality, we mean two conditions. First is completeness, which means if a consumer is exposed to two different bundles called A and B, consumer will consume both, and at the end he or she will be able to rank them, as either he will say the first is preferred or the second is preferred, or he is indifferent between both. By this we mean that a rational person should be able to compare the utilities he or she is deriving from the consumption of commodities, and his behavior should be consistent. This consistency in behavior is more pronounced in second condition, which is transitivity. That is, now a person has three bundles to consume, A, B and C. He consumes A and B and he ranks A better than B. Then in some other similar condition, he consumes B and C and he ranks B as better than C. So from his consumption pattern, we can conclude that whenever under similar conditions the person will be exposed to A and C, he or she will prefer consuming A and will rank it higher. This means consumer's decision is based on the satisfaction of the good and his judgment is consistent. Monotonicity. Monotonicity simply says the more the better. That is, a consumer prefers larger quantities of a commodity over smaller quantities of that commodity. Students, we can divide all the commodities into two broad groups, goods and bads. Goods are those commodities for which higher quantities are preferred. For example, if you like consuming ice cream, then having 2 scoop of ice cream will be preferred over having 1 scoop of it. However, there is another category of the commodities for which we do not like them in larger quantities. Instead, the smaller quantities are preferred. For example, pollution. A smaller quantity of pollution will be preferred over a larger quantity of pollution. Therefore, by monotonicity assumption, we exclude bads from our bundles. Next is convexity, which says that average is better. That is, if a consumer can choose from three bundles. The one in which there is a large quantity of X, but there is a very small quantity of Y. Second, in which there is a large quantity of Y and very small quantity of X. And third, in which both X and Y commodities are in reasonable quantities. Normally, the consumer chooses the third bundle in which both commodities are in reasonable quantities. Next is continuity, that means no sudden jumps. Mainly, we need this assumption for mathematical reasons. However, it means that we are comparing the utilities of different bundles in a continuous consumption time period. The main tool on which ordinal utility approach relies is indifference curve. As the name suggests, indifference curve shows different bundles of two commodities that give the consumer the same level of satisfaction. That is, out of thousands of possible combinations of two goods, good X and good Y, we pick up one bundle and compare it with others. There will be some bundles that give us more utility than this bundle. Similarly, there will be some bundles that will give us less utility than that bundle. But there will also be a few bundles which will give us the same level of satisfaction as the standard bundle. The indifference curve is a locus of such bundles. That is, it connects all those bundles that give the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. Let's understand it with the help of table. Assume a bundle A in which we have 1 unit of good X and 12 units of good Y. Let's assume that this gives us a specific level of satisfaction noted as K. Now there is a second bundle. This bundle has more unit of commodity X. Because it has more quantity of good X, so this bundle will give us more satisfaction. However, to make it indifferent to the first bundle, we reduce some quantity of Y so that it also gives us same level of satisfaction. In the third bundle, again, the quantity of good X is increased, but to make it indifferent to the first bundle in utility, the quantity of good Y is decreased, and so on. I hope now you would have an idea of why, if we are increasing the unit of commodity X, why we are decreasing the quantity of good Y. Because the more is preferred. However, we have to make the bundles identical. So, if we will add the quantity of one good, we will have to reduce the quantity of other good. However, there is another interesting thing to note. From bundle A to B, we increased X by 1 unit and dropped Y by 5 units. From bundle B to C, we increased X again by 1 unit and decreased Y by 3 units. Then from C to D and D to E, again X is increased by 1 unit. However, the decrease in Y is not constant. it decreased by 2 units and then by 1 unit. Why it is so? What is the rationale behind this? Students, we know that in our general life, we give more importance to those things which we have in lesser quantities, and we give less importance to those things or those commodities which are in abundant quantity. You can visit a market. If there are abundant quantities of, let's say, bananas, the price of bananas will be low. However, if the quantity of, let's say, tomatoes is very low, then its price will be high. Similarly, you can also see that water in our life is very important. But in our normal days, when we have abundant quantity of water around us, we do not give it so much importance. Hence, we would be reluctant to pay a large amount against it. However, if you are visiting a desert and your water storage has lost somewhere, you have lost your water bottles, then you may be ready to pay a very large amount against a water bottle, because now you have it in very less quantity. Similarly, in the start of the semester, you may not give so much importance to the time, but as the exam approaches near, you attach more importance to it and utilize it effectively to study and to achieve higher grades. Same is the case here. In bundle A, the good X is in lesser quantity, hence its importance will be less. The good X is in smaller quantity, so its importance will be higher, and any increase in X will give us too much satisfaction. It will result in increasing our satisfaction by a large amount. But to compensate it and to make this bundle indifferent to the bundle A, we have to decrease the Y, and because Y is in large amount, so it is not as much important for us. To get one more unit of X, we will be ready to sacrifice the large quantity of Y. Then on bundle C and B. Now on bundle B, we have X relatively in larger quantity, so its importance will decrease a little. Therefore, in bundle C, to have one more unit of X, we will not be ready to sacrifice as much of quantity of Y as we were previously. Similarly, as we will move to bundle D and E, the quantity of X will increase, therefore the importance of X will decrease and the quantity of Y will decrease, therefore its importance will increase, and we shall not be ready to sacrifice so many units of Y for 1 unit of X. The same can be interpreted in a very similar way using marginal utility approach. When X is smaller, its marginal utility is higher. Therefore, an increase in X leads to a large increase in the marginal utility, and thus the total utility increases by large quantity. However, when the Y is in larger quantity, the marginal utility in the last units of Y will be very small. Therefore, we will have to discard more number of units of y in compensation for an increase of x by 1 unit. This ratio is represented by marginal rate of substitution (MRS). We shall come to it a little later. Now, plotting these bundles of good x and good y, we have an indifference curve which falls from left to right, and marginal rate of substitution shows the number of units of a commodity that must be dropped to get one more unit of other good, keeping the utility level as same. That is, it shows the rate of change in commodity Y and commodity X. Students, marginal rate of substitution is also called as slope of indifference curve. We can show how the trade-off changes more formally by deriving an expression for the slope of indifference curve. Let's assume that consumer is at point A and he moves to bundle B. In moving from A to B, the total utility remains constant because both bundles are on same indifference curve. Therefore, the utility lost because of consuming less Y should be equal to the utility gained by consuming more of X. The loss in utility because of consuming less of Y can be calculated as multiplying the marginal utility of Y with the change in the quantity of Y. Because the quantity of Y is decreasing, so we will have a negative sign. In the same way, we can measure the gain in the utility by consuming more of X. As we know that the slope is the change in the change in Y to the change in X. Therefore, simplifying it in similar way, we have the marginal rate of substitution, which represents the slope of indifference curve, is the ratio of marginal utilities of good X and good Y. Now let's talk about some prominent properties of an indifference curve. First is that indifference curves are negative in slope. That is, an indifference curve falls from left to right. We have already discussed in much detail on why we have to decrease units of one commodity to increase the quantity of another commodity if we are to remain on same indifference curve. Second is diminishing marginal rate of substitution. That is, as we move from left to right on an indifference curve, the marginal rate of substitution or the magnitude of slope of an indifference curve decreases. We have already discussed and understood it from the table. Now let's observe it on diagram. We can observe it on graph easily by marking the points on an indifference curve representing similar change in good X. Now we can see that from first to second bundle, the increase, and second to third bundle, the increase in X is same, but the decrease in Y is decreasing. That is, first we have to sacrifice more quantity of Y, and then we are sacrificing lesser and lesser quantity of commodity Y. The size of these triangles represent the magnitude of MRS, and we can observe that the size is decreasing. Third is higher IC represents higher level of satisfaction. This is because we know that on higher IC, the bundles will have more quantities of at least one of the goods. And by monotonicity, we know that higher units of commodities are preferred over smaller or lower units of the commodities. Therefore, higher the IC, higher the satisfaction. Next is that ICs do not intersect each other. Let's see what happens if ICs intersect. These are the two ICs, and by comparing a bundle A on one IC with a bundle B on another IC, we can see that bundle B is on higher IC, therefore bundle B will be preferred to bundle A. Now let's compare bundle A with bundle D. As bundle D lies at a point where both ICs intersect, so it lies on both ICs. Therefore, comparing bundle A with bundle D, because both lie on same IC, so we must be indifferent between these two. Now compare bundle B with bundle D. Again, both bundles lie on same IC, so the consumer must be indifferent between these two. And by transitivity, we can conclude that the consumer must be indifferent between A and B. However, we already concluded that bundle B is preferred to bundle A. Therefore, this intersection led to a contradiction. So, intersecting ICs will lead to contradictions. Therefore, we say that ICs do not intersect each other. Now, let's talk about consumer equilibrium. By equilibrium, we mean the stable position. That is, any position in which a change is not desired. For a consumer, a situation in which any kind of change will result in reducing the satisfaction will represent that kind of situation, and consumer will never want to have a change in it. In other words, consumer equilibrium will be at a point where the satisfaction level of a consumer is at its maximum. We have represented consumer choices and the preferences with indifference curves and have stated that higher indifference curve represents higher satisfaction. So, a bundle lying on higher indifference curve will be preferred to a bundle lying on lower indifference curve. However, our choices are constrained by the prices and the budget, and this constraint is represented by the budget line. A budget line, as we already discussed in previous lecture, divides commodities into affordable and not affordable. So, from this diagram, we can see that although the bundles lying on IC2 will give us the most satisfaction, however, these bundles are out of the reach of the consumer. Those bundles that are affordable by the consumers are lying on IC naught in between the points where this IC intersects budget line, and on IC1 where it is tangent to indifference curve. As we know that the satisfaction level on the bundles on IC1 will be higher, therefore the consumer will choose a bundle that lies on IC1 and also is affordable. So the consumer will be in equilibrium when he chooses a bundle which locates where budget line is tangent to highest possible indifference curve. This is represented by point E. And from simple mathematics, we know that the point where two curves meet each other, their slopes are same. Therefore, at this point, the slope of IC represented by marginal rate of substitution will be equal to the slope of budget line, which represents the price ratios. That is all for this lecture. In the next lecture, we shall discuss income, price and substitution effect. And we shall also study how ordinal approach breaks down the price effect into income effect and substitution effect very easily. Please post your questions and give your feedback in comments. Also consider liking the video, sharing it and subscribing the channel. Thank you and goodbye.